IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat. Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Manoj Kevalramani, and today I have with me my colleague Rohan Seth, and we are going to be talking about India's data protection regulation. It's a law that was proposed in December last year. Since then, it's been with Parliament. It's currently with the Joint Parliamentary Committee, which is examining the provisions of the legislation. And this is really interesting because this committee has not been able to meet for months because of the pandemic. And it just did in the last week of July. It met on the 27th. From what we understand, there was a couple of hours of conversation. Not everybody who's part of the committee could attend. There were about 18 out of the 30 MPs who are part of the committee who attended. And there's obviously no serious forward movement because others could not join in virtually or they didn't want to have a conversation virtually. And at the same time as all this is happening, while we're still working out the data protection regulation, we saw a massive hack that took place with regard to Twitter sometime back, earlier this month, if I'm correct. And that hack had sort of accounts of people like even Barack Obama being compromised. So that sort of raised many more questions about the urgency of India having a clear, comprehensive data protection framework which defines in everybody's rights, responsibilities, and which sets processes in place so that such things don't necessarily happen, or at least even when they happen, how do we go about securing the data? So Rohan, you've written about this, and I want to sort of welcome you to the show by first asking you, can you tell us a little bit about this Twitter hack? I mean, all that I know about it is that Obama's account was hacked.
So it's funny that you mentioned that Obama's account was hacked because I think he has the largest following of all the people who got hacked. But pretty notable people were actually hacked. So you had Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and a bunch of others. And so what basically happened was that some people, we don't know who they are yet, but they got access to some of Twitter's user tools. And they used those tools to basically set up a scheme that said that, well, I am trying to give back to society. And the idea was that this is a link through which you can transfer Bitcoin to me, and I will send you double the Bitcoins back. So if Jeff Bezos says something like this and says that he's only doing something like this for an hour, people would actually take the bait. And that's exactly what happened. So you had a bunch of people transferring wealth to Jeff Bezos, apparently, and to Elon Musk, hoping that they'd get double the Bitcoins back. But of course, that didn't happen. And I think the first trigger warning sign should have been that Jeff Bezos said that he was going to give back to the community. I just thought that was hilarious. So that happened. And that actually brings me to sort of my instinctive reaction to this. Because once the hack happened, I immediately thought that this is exactly why we need a data protection bill. And I can think of anyone who closely follows tech policy in India to come to the same conclusion. And the fact that the Joint Parliamentary Committee itself is not meeting virtually is actually testament to the fact how seriously we take cybersecurity in India. So there, as you said, not everyone of the ministers was present to the Joint Parliamentary Committee session, and that's because Medianama reported this, and it's basically that no virtual depositions will take place, and all meetings will happen in person because of the danger of a third party, which is, by the way, the video conferencing platform. So they're actually worried that Zoom might be listening in, or let's say Google Meet might be listening in to the conversation. So that's how seriously we take cybersecurity in this country. So when this hack happened, my first instinctive reaction was that data protection is important and cybersecurity is not great.
This is incredible, right? That they didn't want to meet on any other, that they didn't want to do this virtually because they had concerns about third-party intervention or loss of data or, things like that. It's just incredible that that's happening, where at the same time, so much of like in the first few months of the pandemic, we saw so much of conversation, even security-related conversation happening virtually. It's incredible that this is what's actually happening. But let's sort of move to what exactly. So, I mean, the other thing about this committee meeting that I was reading about was that, they were talking about two specific provisions which essentially relate to exemptions for different government agencies under this legislation, which also is interesting because the argument was that if you're going to give this carte blanche for people to get exempted, then really who would not want to get exempted from any sort of processes, right?
So, see, there's a bit of a trade-off here, and Anupam would be proud that I mentioned trade-off. But the idea is that the state should have some agency to basically say that I do not belong in this bracket because this is being done for national security or stuff like this, to just maintain public order, which makes sense. But just the fact that the state has to be exempted should come with some safeguards, some oversight, because it's a power that can very readily be abused. And what I realized following this space for a while now is that it is generally hard to see such safeguards or oversight existing. And that this happens in multiple regulations. The data protection law is just the latest example of this. So when the state says that I need to process this data and not be held accountable for it, to me, that just makes no sense if you just, because as you said, this creates an incentive for any fiduciary, which by fiduciary I mean any data processor. I'm not going to go into technical definitions of what a processor and fiduciary is, but because that will take a whole other episode. But the idea here is that any government body that is processing data will have an incentive to say that I don't want to bear any unforeseen consequences of this processing. So why don't I exempt myself from this? And the exemptions could have been a lot more encompassing, a lot more fleeting, but they're not. But the current manner in which they exist, and they're not retroactive and stuff, but the current manner in which they exist is still pretty broad and still creates a very big incentive for government to not be held accountable for its action.
Yeah. No, I think, Rohan, it's a good thing to actually just, I can take 30 seconds to just quickly tell people a little bit about the legislation that we're talking about. And what we're going to try and do through the next bit of this conversation is that we're going to try and see, we've spoken about the Twitter hack, we've spoken about the fact that this legislation is still stuck in Parliament. It was submitted in December 2019. It's really, really urgent because you constantly keep hearing things like, data is national wealth and so on. And I know this is Rohan's pet peeve, therefore I'm choosing to mention data as national wealth here. But the idea is that we constantly keep hearing about the importance of data, and we also realize that, from the point of view of privacy, it's fundamental, given that we are today, everything is digital. So we're producing so much data constantly. I think it's important to just specify a little bit about what the law proposes to do, right? The law sort of talks about two types of data, personal and non-personal data. It tries to govern things like who can access, who's a data creator, who can access, who processes, and what are the sort of redressal mechanisms in case of violations of provisions. Under this, any individual who is the creator, entity or individual who is the creator of data is known as the data principal. At the same time, like Rohan mentioned, a data fiduciary is somebody who uses the data, who processes the data, is a data fiduciary. There's a special authority that's also been created, that's also proposed, right, Rohan? There's a data...
the Data Protection Authority.
Yeah, and that's the sort of nodal agency for any sort of redressal mechanisms, right?
Yes. So I just want to add a few things there. So it's not a law yet, it's a bill. And it currently looks at... there's a section that talks about non-personal data, but a whole other bill is going to be drafted for non-personal data itself. So there's a section, I think it's section 91 in this current personal data protection bill that says that the government should be able to access non-personal data. But that is going to be looked at much more detail by another law and another body, which is going to be the non-personal data protection authority. So all of that is there. So currently, none of this is set in stone. The JPC is currently hearing this, and the committee within the government that has come up with a non-personal data protection framework, a governance framework that is open to consultation. So if you are willing to go and comment about what the governance framework looks like right now and should be linked, the comments are still open at the time of this podcast recording. And also, I think for the next couple of weeks. So a non-personal data protection regime is yet to be set up, but a personal data protection regime, they're more than halfway there to the bill being finalized, in my view.
Okay, so awesome. So now we've got certain basic things clarified. So this is the current legislation that we're talking about is about the personal data protection. It's The individual or the entity that is creating the data is a data principal. The processing agency is a data fiduciary. There is a data protection agency, which will be your redressal agency. And given that social media platforms is what we're talking about from the point of view of Twitter, they are intermediaries because they will have users of a certain kind of threshold, and they can have an impact on society in many different ways. So now, since we understand what are the different characters involved in this, let's try and see, Rohan, if this Twitter hack, if this entire scenario had happened when this legislation had been passed and was in effect in its current form. What are the processes when something like this happens for an individual whose account has been hacked or whose data has sort of leaked or whose sort of privacy has been violated? What is the process laid down under this legislation currently?
So let's take things one thing at a time, right? So let's say this particular hack would be classified under the bill as a personal data protection breach. And a little bit about how a law such as this works is that generally there is a trigger word. So let's say there is a breach or there is harm to the data principal, which is the user, right? So anytime there is a trigger that is activated, like a breach or a harm, a set of events is set in motion. A certain set of events has to happen so that this can be taken to its logical end. So in the case of a personal data breach, the breach is the trigger word, right? So once a breach happens, let's say in this case, this was a Twitter hack, right? So, and Twitter here is a data fiduciary.
Yeah.
It's also an intermediary. I mean, you can be both things at the same time because they're under different regulations. But here it's a data fiduciary. And the problem here is that, well, as soon as a breach happens, there's a few things that the Twitter would have to do to make sure that this actually is not illegal, that their conduct is not illegal. So which is they need to send a notice to the yet to exist data protection authority. And the notice should include 4 following things, which is the nature of the personal data, which is the subject matter of the breach, number of data principals who are affected by the breach, so how many users were impacted, possible consequences of the breach. This I'm not entirely sure about. I mean, you can have so many consequences of this, just one of them being that a lot of people will lose their money thinking that Jeff Bezos will give them double the money back. Or just people losing access to the control of their messages. So you could maybe, let's say, DM a lot of people, a lot of things on Twitter, which could be very sensitive, and that could lead to a lot of damage to your reputation. And also, the fourth, finally, the action that is being taken by the data fiduciary to remedy the breach. So the idea is that as soon as the breach happens, what exactly has Twitter been doing, what it plans to do, and how it basically plans to manage all of this. So these 4 things need to be included in a notice to the Data Protection Authority. So the thing that sort of interests me, and this I wrote about this in my column, and it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't plug something that I've done before. So I wrote about this in my column. And what I said was that keep in mind that this was a very public data breach, right? Twitter is very visible as a platform compared to HDFC Bank, right? A lot more people care about what happens on Twitter than they do about HDFC Bank. And so the Personal Data Protection Bill in its current form does not require this notice to be visible to the public. So what could happen is that your data could be breached and you would not know about it.
Yeah.
So let's say if I lose access to the Twitter account, the Data Protection Authority is supposed to be notified. And the Data Protection Authority then makes a decision on whether I should know about this or not. And to me, that makes no sense. I mean, I don't know surely the Data Protection Authority has something to do with the fact that my data or the data of billions of other people is being breached. But at least the people who've been compromised should know about this.
Yeah.
And that's what I addressed in my column basically, because the way I look at this bill is that it had 3 main stakeholders to manage. Think of it like a triangle, right? There is the government, there are companies like Twitter and Facebook, and then there's the user. And before the bill, the power dynamic that existed was that the power was, all of it was with the company. The government was the second most powerful stakeholder, and then you would have users, which basically have no power at all. Just subject to whatever privacy agreement that you have agreed to under Twitter when you tick, I have read and understood the terms and conditions. So those are the 3 things I imagine. So what the bill is supposed to do is to manage these interests and say that, well, there is a discrepancy in how the power is being shared, and so the user should have at least some more of it. In my mind, the ideal situation would be that the user would at least get some amount of control of the data back. And a breach is possibly one of the worst things that could happen to your data, right?
Yeah.
So if I lose access to my Twitter account, or let's take it up a notch, if I lose access to my WhatsApp account, I would like to know what messages are being sent under my name.
Yeah.
And the fact that the bill doesn't actually make it a priority for companies to notify me was basically what was troubling me, and so I wrote this call.
This is interesting, right? I mean, so I can understand in the context of a social media platform like Twitter, whatever, but when it is linked to something to do with your on social media, you may end up hurting your reputation, which for some people may be very, very, for everybody, it may be very distressing, but for some people, it may cause financial loss. But when it starts to when you talk about banks and things like that, and if those institutions are not legally required to talk about data breaches, which can be extremely problematic, I think that really sort of throws a big spanner in the works, right? Because I would like to know if in case some of my banking data, my accounting, my sort of bank statements data and things like that have leaked. Because a lot of the times, you end up getting, and this happens in India presently also, right? You'll end up getting a call from somewhere saying, about some sort of support, some sort of charity, something like that. And when you ask them, well, how on earth did you get my number?
Yeah.
And the answer that you get is, we have your number from a database of, of individuals making between X amount and Y amount. Yeah. And you'd be like, but how on earth do you know that? I have never, because I've gotten sometimes calls from places where I've never visited in India. We are contacting people who make over 50,000 rupees or something like that. And I'm like, but how do you know how much money I make? And they're like, no, it's in our database. Well, how did it go in your database? It tells you that somewhere there is some data that's leaked.
Yeah, so there are two things here, basically. So the first thing is that consent is sort of broken. And I'm borrowing this from, I'm stealing this from Rahul Mathan's book, which is Privacy 3.0. Great read. Everyone should go through it if you can. And towards the end of the book, he talks about how consent is broken. I don't recall the 3 points completely. But so the thing was that, most users don't understand what they're giving consent for, right? So at the time you signed up for your bank, maybe your bank could have basically said that, well, we'll be sharing your data with these people who will now who have the power to contact you. Yes. And then consent is also interconnected because companies have an incentive to basically just have a terms and conditions agreement that is as broad as possible. So once your bank has an extremely broad consumer agreement, as does, let's say, the data processor that your bank is selling your data to, those two agreements that you have now essentially signed can end up with you in a situation where you have a processor that knows how much you're earning and can reach out to you on that basis. That is troubling, especially when that applies to health data or financial data. Right? The second thing is that when it comes to a breach, the DPA gets to decide whether or not you know about it. But there is no standard set of rules that the DPA has to follow, at least under the bill. So there is basically no boilerplate that tells you that, well, if I haven't been told about a breach, it's because of these particular reasons.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. I mean, the DPA has complete discretion. And it can basically use that to say, well, I don't want to tell you about this because I don't want to tell you about this. Maybe you had a national security issue that would have occurred and that's why the DPA held back whatever. But in this case, it could just say, well, it slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
But that's the most absurd example I can think of. But they can just say it slipped through the cracks. And there's no incentive for the DPA to basically tell you about as many data breaches as possible. So instead, like what you have here is that a breach happens, the fiduciary tells the DPA says, okay, cool, fix it, sure. And you are none the wiser, even though your data has been leaked or your account has been compromised. And to me, that is fundamentally why, in this case, the law itself, the bill itself, is inadequate.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, if I could just add to that, saying that any compromising of Rohan's account will be a national security breach. Given that he's such an asset. But Rohan, how do we address this? So one of the points that I sort of readily get from what you're saying is that there need to be clear standards for the DPA in terms of how it sort of deals with fiduciaries and how it sort of also provides the information about breaches to users, right?
Yes. So there needs to be a standard set of guidelines to minimize the amount of discretion that the DPA has here. Because you need to realize that users are equally big stakeholders who don't have a lot of power. And to correct that, there need to be a set of guidelines for the user to know why a possible breach hasn't been shared for them. And it can be as broad as saying, well, national security was being compromised and so the DPA didn't want it. Fine. But at least have that in place so that I have at least reason to believe that this is being done for the public good, right? So minimize discussion for the DPA. And secondly, and this is a more radical alternative, it is to say that, well, all companies, regardless of how big or small, need to tell their users when a breach has occurred. So don't go to the DPA. I mean, go to the DPA, but also at the same time, tell the users that their data has been compromised. If your password has been compromised, if your financial bank account details have been compromised, if your Aadhaar number has been compromised, just go to the user and tell them exactly this. And both of these situations are better than the one that we are currently living in. So there is no bad choice here fundamentally. It's just that there is, let's say, a more radical choice and a less radical choice. Both of them better than what we currently have.
Yeah, I think what you're asking for is essentially more accountability from a bureaucratic agency, which will be the DPA, and more accountability from a private entity, which enjoys inordinate amount of asymmetric sort of power compared to the user. Something like a Twitter or a Facebook, inordinate amount of asymmetric power in that dynamic with an individual. And trying to sort of, through legislation, compel them to be far more accountable. The challenge, and while that might be great legislation, the challenge would be how would you implement something like this given sort of judicial capacity? I mean, would you then end up going to lower courts to implement, to challenge the non-implementation of some of these regulations, or would you look at what would the mechanism by which a consumer can actually then seek redressal, right? Because let's assume the DPA has guidelines and it doesn't do anything. For an individual to go and challenge the DPA as sort of an authority, I presume is not really going to happen. At the same time, for an individual to take, say, a big social media platform to court, the sort of asymmetry in that, although it might be great to actually have that mechanism, which I think we should, but at the end of the day, sort of power dynamic that plays out, right? And also the fact that would you have separate redressal systems in courts and all that, given that so much of this happens in real time, and you might end up fighting Twitter in court for 10 years by the time Twitter might even cease to exist, given the way technology evolves.
Yeah, I mean, the redressal mechanism itself is an interesting thing to look at, because I say this with a very heavy heart, there are no great answers here. You could maybe, let's say, approach the DPA and then try to go for a redressal mechanism, but in that sense, the DPA would have hundreds and thousands and maybe millions of requests. So that body is going to be overburdened. Similarly, if you go to the judiciary, it's going to be a very similar problem to have. So I wish I had an answer to how to make this a better process for the bureaucracy or the judiciary in this country. I don't. And which is why I say that let's have the maximum amount of transparency as we possibly can. So there are the least amount of decisions for an authority to make, so they can actually focus on stuff that is important. And secondly, as you pointed out, and this is something I just addressed before in the podcast as well, is that, see, the current power dynamic is that as a user, I am helpless. There is not a lot I can do. And this bill was supposed to help at least address some of that. And in the case of breaches, that's not happening. So if this passes, I don't see how I am better off. Maybe with the exceptional chance that the DPA decides that this is important for me to know about, which may or may not happen. So this is fundamentally what's been troubling me. I don't have a solution for this, unfortunately, but I can identify the problem and help look at how we can go about this.
All right, brilliant. That is excellent. So I think we've had a fun conversation. At least we sort of clarified lots of things for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people also. What we're going to try and do is that we're going to try and link Rohan's op-ed and a summary of the bill by PRS in the show notes. So for anyone of you who's interested in actually going through what the bill says, that will be available, and also Rohan's views will be available in the show notes. Thank you so much, Rohan, for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, If you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. So, a great week of shows behind us, and I hope that you've been catching up on as much of it as you can. We had Abhishek Bachchan on Football Shitball. Yeah, let me say that again. Abhishek Bachchan was on Football Shitball. Did I mention Abhishek Bachchan was on Football Shitball? That was a fun episode. You should definitely check that out. Really, really deep conversation about cricket and things like that. We had Vikram Kochar on Cyrus Says, talking about Z platforms and stuff like what's going on over there. On the note, Maruk had spoken to Sanjay Jha, which was again a really, really interesting conversation. On Edges and Sledges, the guys are having an interesting conversation about, well, you know, what are favorite formats of cricket and things like that. So it's just really been a really, really awesome week on the network, and please do check things out. And with that, hope to see you next week.
Are you constantly seeking happiness? Wondering how to make the most of every day? How not to let your inhibitions stop you from achieving your goals? It's now time to get your A-game on. It's time to unlock your true potential. Tune in to the Empowering series with me, Zarina Poonawalla, to feel empowered in all genres of life. From behavioral skills to management skills. From health to relationships. From mental well-being to emotional well-being. And of course, your finances. I've got you covered. With these tips and tricks from me, Zarina, and true life stories from my amazing guests, you're bound to bring your purest to the table. Tune in to the Empowering series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.